This video is brought to you by Dr. Kristen R. Bromley's Guitar Method Book Series and Online Music Academy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Bromley. Welcome to my online academy. It's so great to have you joining me here in these online lessons. This is lesson 32 in this series that is all about jazz guitar. As you know, I love jazz guitar and I am delighted to bring this course to you, where we're really working in a line upon line fashion. Now, in this lesson, it's going to be slightly different. We've kind of hit this point in the course where we've really done quite a bit of fundamental things, especially on the improv side for soloing over minor 7th chords, over dominant 7th chords, and over major 6th chords. Which really sets us up now as we're going to start working on bebop here in the near future. We've also worked on copying the chords with shell voicings, and we're going to start working on learning other voicings. But a lot of what we've done you can actually use anytime you want to play in the pre-bebop eras, and you can bring it into playing in the later eras. Now, our guitarist that is really the father of jazz guitar, so important in those pre-bebop eras, is Charlie Christian. And he also helped. He was pushing the language towards bebop and what would have become post-bebop had he lived long enough. And I wanted to take and do just an informative lesson where we sort of review different aspects of his improv style. Now, he played chords, of course, but the way he plays chords isn't so foundational that lots of people copy those. We've talked about Freddie Green on the shell voicings and how to play that Freddie Green style. Super foundational, super important to play and learn how to comp the chords the way Freddie Green did, doing that Freddie Green style. But Charlie Christian's comping style, it's not anything that necessarily we really want to go after. But what was so important about Charlie Christian is the way that he improvised those solos. So I've written up here on the board 8 different points that sort of summarize what we can find in his solos. Now, this is based upon my research looking at lots and lots of different recorded solos that he played and found these jazz elements in there. And I'm just going to summarize them. It's important to know how he played, and of course we can incorporate these things into our playing. And most of these things we've worked at to some point all this way through the course, especially the ones over on this side of the board, which are really the jazz language parts that we want to get into our playing that are so foundational as we move into bebop and what comes after bebop. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort of walk us through these. It'll be a short, informative lesson that just sort of summarizes Charlie Christian, since he's such an important jazz guitarist and someone for us to learn from. So the first thing that we see a lot in his style, and that is such a foundational and important thing in our improvisation, is being able to improvise with just the chord tones. Now, he was playing over major 6th chords, minor 7th chords, dominant 7th chords, and diminished 7th chords, fully diminished 7th chords. So we'll get these arpeggio sounds. Over the major 6th chord, you'll hear that root 3, 5, 6 root, and you'll hear just melodic playing or just arpeggiating through different pieces of those. You'll also sometimes hear without the 6th, just the root 3, 5 root sound. You'll hear those kinds of things in his playing, and those kinds of things are super important to us. For the minor 7th chords, interestingly enough, you'll actually hear the root, the flatted 3rd, the 5th, and the flatted 7th. Sometimes you'll hear a minor 6th sound over it as well. So that minor 6th is an early era sound that we hear even in the gypsy jazz style and those. So either arpeggio will work over those minor 7th chords. Both of those 6th and that flatted 7th are treated as chord tones with that one. The dominant 7th, of course, root 3, 5, flat 7. And then the fully diminished 7th, you'll hear that sound in his playing as well. So those ones come out. Now, with that, we start to hear upper extensions, meaning he's going to treat the 9th and the 11th and the 13th as a chord tone in the arpeggiated fashion. This happens a lot with the 9th especially, and in a couple different ways. With the major 6th chord, we don't so often hear it skipped from that 6th up to the 9th, though that could be an option. A lot of times we'll hear the 9th just sort of attached on to to the top after playing the root again. So root 3, 5, 6, root, and then that 9. So you hear that thrown on there. With the minor 7th chords, you can just have it sitting up on top. Could also go to the 6th, but in his style over the minor 7th chords, he doesn't necessarily use that one as much, though we do hear the 11th, but that comes out of the blues scale. But you can play that 9th up there, and I wouldn't be surprised when we find that on that minor 7th chord as an option as well that we could see in his solos. We see it very often with the major 6 chords and the dominant 7th chords. With the dominant 7th chord, same as that major 6 chord, you can have that root there up to that 9th, or just that flatted 7th up to that 9th. So you'll hear that sound, and just sitting on the 9th sometimes, or using it as the 2, even in place, we'll hear that treated like a chord tone. The flat 9 happens over the dominant 7th chords. This is a sound that we do hear with him, which is really pushing us into something that happens a lot in the bebop era, which is kind of interesting in that you get this flat 9 sound in the arpeggio if you start on the 3rd of the dominant 7th chord and do a fully diminished arpeggio, and so it's kind of like superimposing that fully diminished 7th chord over, and which way he's hearing it and how it comes, I don't know for sure. I hear it sort of as something that can sit there out of that diminished 7th. I also hear that diminished 7th sort of imposed over the top. But the flat 9 often resolves down to the root with him. So that sort of thing, those are the chord tones, and that is such a foundational sound. You hear a lot of arpeggiations. A lot of times in this early era, we're really hearing a lot of different arpeggiations of the chords broken up by some stepwise motion and some other things. Whereas as we move into the bebop era, we hear a lot more stepwise motion occasionally broken up by arpeggiations or other things. And that's sort of a change as we move forward. Lots more stepwise motion. But in this era with Charlie Christian, you get lots of arpeggios, which is so great because if you're going to transcribe some of his solos or start getting your own playing really happening, what a fun era to start with when we need to get down those arpeggios and where we can play in a style where playing arpeggios, even strictly arpeggios, makes a great solo in the fluid, constant 8th note texture. So we use arpeggios to play melodically later on, definitely as well, but sometimes the sound changes, and in this early style with Charlie Christian, you're going to hear a lot of sort of arpeggiated things happening in his solos. Whereas later on we might hear lots more stepwise motion. Okay, so that's a major thing, very foundational, and we have worked a lot on that in the previous lessons. If you're just jumping in on this lesson, you may want to check out the ones we're working on, improvising over minor 7th chords, dominant 7th chords, and major 6th chords using arpeggio notes, and then some of these other things that we're going to talk about. So, a big thing that we see, another thing, is to connect chord tones with a diatonic or chromatic passing tone. We see this will come in, such an important part of the jazz language, and this is something that Charlie Christian had done quite a bit of. So, I have just some examples over on the right side of the board, just pulling out the most classic things that we find in his solos, and that is just regularly part of that jazz language. So, a lot of these will work over the major 6, minor 7th, and dominant 7th chord types, though a couple of them are a little bit more specific. The 5-4-3 can work over any of those types, though the 3rd, being a natural 3rd, needs to be the major 6th or the dominant 7th chords. If we were going to the flatted 3rd, then that would be a minor 7th chord. So the 3rd would need to be changed there for the major versus the minor. But 5-4-3. 6, and when I do these, they can go either direction. So 5-4-3 or 3-4-5, either way. So you'll see that one. 6 to that, down to the sharp 5 or flat 6, down to the 5. Such a classic. especially over a major 6 chord, though it can happen over a dominant 7th chord as well. And we can actually take that sound. I haven't necessarily seen it in a Charlie Christian solo, but it does work over the minor 7th chords as well. And maybe it's there, I just haven't noticed. On the top of my brain, thinking through the solos that I've analyzed, I don't think of one, but it could be in a solo somewhere because it totally works and it's classic. We have the root 7 flat 7. This is especially a dominant kind of sound, but it does work with the minor 7th chords as well, though I haven't necessarily seen it a ton in the solos that I've analyzed of his over minor 7th chords, but definitely there over the dominant 7th chords. And it can happen over major 6 chords, which we'll talk about in a minute when we sort of take dominant 7th sounds and superimpose them over major 6 chords or vice versa. You got the flat 3 2 to the root. This is classic with the minor chords. So just connecting the 2 chord tones, the flat 3 and the root with the 2, and the one before we're connecting the root and the flatted 7th, which is chord tones with that natural 7, and then 6 and 5 being chord tones, we're connecting them with the one in between, 5 and 3 being chord tones, connecting one with the one in between. That's kind of how those work. This is something that I see a lot throughout Charlie Christian solos, where he actually goes 5, flat 5, 4, 3, just right down chromatic, which is a great sound. So that's one that is there quite a bit. 2 flat 2 root is another one, or 9 flat 9 root. So that's an option. The 5 6 flat 7 is a dominant 7th thing, also works over the minor 7th chords. You're going to see it there as well. The 3 2 to the root is the equivalent of the one up here for minor. So we have for major chords, we're connecting that root and that 3rd. The root 7 to the 6, so connecting the root and the 6th over a major 6 chord with the natural 7. So those are some classic examples that I've found in his solos that appear more than once, and they all work and are part of the language. We've worked on a lot of these throughout the course. Besides connecting chord tones in a stepwise fashion with a chromatic tone or a diatonic one that's in the key and in the scale, the matching scale, we can approach chord tones from a half step away. It doesn't have to be, meaning we can skip to the note that we're going to resolve with. So like a flat 3 to the 3, a sharp 5 to the 6, a 7 to the root, or even with going from the 4 to the 3. Most of them you'll see in his style are going to come from the half step below, so a fret below, and then land on the chord tone. But we can go the other way as well, and the one that we see the most going the other way is that 4 to the 3. So this sort of sound. So it's pretty classic to approach the 3rd that way, the 6th as well. So, and sometimes you'll hear the 4th thrown in this era, just played even like a bluesy sense, and I just used the 4 there without actually enclosing the 3rd. But that 7th, you're going to hear it, and that 4 to the 3 I already showed. So those are some really, really classic ones there. You got up here the enclosure sound, which kind of goes a step further. It's going to do either a diatonic or chromatic pitch above a chord tone, and one below a chord tone, and then land on the chord tone, or it could go the other way. But the most classic one you'll hear Charlie Christian play is this one right here. 4 flat 3 3. Such a great sound. Such an important sound, that 4 flat 3 3, and we've worked on that a lot in the course. You could also do the 4 2 3. Now I hear this one really well with minor, because you take that 2 and land on the flatted 3rd, which is nice. You could also do the 3, the natural 3 to the 2 to the flat 3, but especially you hear that 4 to the 2 to the flat 3. But it also works to go to the natural 3rd. You're going to hear, these are just some examples, they're not exhaustive, but you're going to hear these diatonic ones as well. The flat 7 to the sharp 5 to to enclose that 6 is really nice. Especially if you want to get a little bluesy with your sound over the major 6 chord. And then the 7 to the 2 to the root would be another diatonic example. So, enclosures, also known in theoretical terms as double neighbors. And so these could even be considered neighbors when you're doing this. Passing tones and the neighbor tones would be more theoretical terms to use. This is at the heart of the language, and Charlie Christian does such a great job. He was really leading out and helping to develop that language, so learning his solos are awesome, and this is a really great summary of his note choices for the most part. Sometimes we'll hear over major 6th, dominant 7th, and minor 7th chords sort of the blues scale sound. Of course, he's a guitarist, so you're going to get a little bit of that. So that means we get sometimes that flat 5 in there. The flat 5 going to the 4 is in minor chords is a common thing to hear him do. You're also going to hear just that flatted 3rd sitting over a dominant 7th chord. And also even getting that flat 5 in there, and the flatted 7th already sits in a dominant 7th chord, but over the major 6th chord it doesn't. So you hear these bluesy sounds sometimes happening over top of that. That happens with Charlie Christian solos. You also hear him, and I mentioned this earlier, play dominant 7th ideas over major 6 chords and vice versa. So it's sort of interchangeable. If you want to get a little bluesier in the sound over a major 6 chord, just start throwing in that dominant 7th. Works over the major 6 as well as it works over the dominant 7th, and then the major 6 ideas work over the dominant 7th chords as well. It just sounds a little less, it doesn't have the tension of that flatted 7th that gives us that dominant 7th sound, but you will hear especially that 5, sharp 5 or flat 6 to that 6 sometimes thrown in. So, but the dominant 7th idea over the major 6th, totally legal, gives us a blues sound. The other thing you're going to hear a lot in his style are falls, so, or bends, or slides into a note, or turns, and any kind of other slur. But these types of things are pretty classic. His swinging style is a little bit more straight up and down. Like later on, a little more, I don't want to say choppy. It smooths out as we move forward in jazz. And the swing becomes a little bit more smooth and legato-like than it was in his era. So if you're really wanting to learn from him in a classic sense and play in the early jazz era, you can copy his swing style and the way that he's phrasing things, which really is pushing towards where jazz goes. But if you want to have his kind of language and sound more modern in the way that you're phrasing things, then you're not going to want to necessarily copy the way that he phrases things. And we're going to smooth out that swing a little bit, which is something that we'll explore further in the course as we continue to go forward. So speaking of which, his ideas are a lot of the time they're 8th note based, which is pretty classic. But then that's broken up by syncopated quarter notes, which is pretty classic, or other longer notes that are hit on the beat. And that could be quarter notes, or it could be notes that are longer than quarter notes. So So you get lots of the fluid 8th notes, so to speak, broken up by those other things. So this is pretty much a summary of his style of soloing, which is pretty awesome, just in analyzing lots of different solos that have been recorded of him playing. And we owe so much to Charlie Christian. So it's great to just have an understanding of this and to work on these things in your playing. We've been working on lots of these things in the course. Now, as we move forward in the course, we're going to learn some new voicings next. We've done a lot in the last few lessons, the last several lessons, I should say, probably 20 or more lessons on improvising and getting down foundational things. Many of these things right here we've been working on getting down. We haven't worked on diminished chords yet, but we will when we get to it. We're working on the minor seventh, the major sixth, and the dominant seventh chords in soloing, because that's where we start with our foundation. But we're going to work on the other ones as we continue to move forward. But in the next few lessons, we're actually going to go back and work on more with the chords. So we're going to learn some new voicings and some new comping rhythms, and we're going to start looking at the types of things that happen as we move forward and get into the bebop era and so on. And as we get done with those chords, we're going to start working on learning bebop scales and getting more of the bebop specific era into our playing, learning more of that stepwise motion. We'll also work on some etudes and some licks, learn more scales, learn more arpeggios, lots of great things to come. So thought it would be fun just to do sort of a little summary lesson of the Charlie Christian's style, his ideas, the types of theoretical things that are happening in his playing, in case that's of interest to you and helpful to you. And I think it's important for us to understand these ancestral players of our jazz guitar styles. So I've got this one for you. Keep having fun with the guitar. These are coming out Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Of course, we got Technique Tuesdays, Theory Thursdays. Saturdays, we're doing improvisation in the blues, rock, and pop styles. So pretty cool right now. Lots of great things. Hundreds of lessons already on the channel. And yeah, as we move forward in this course, the next thing we're going to be working on is comping those chords, which is going to be super fun. Take care. We'll see you again. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. For more in-depth lessons and to progress through a free guitar course, check out my Guitar 101 series on YouTube and my guitar method books, which all come with access to hours of in-depth video lessons. You can find more information about me and my products at KristenBromley.com. Take care.